Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to look at the untold truth about the American Revolution. So let's get started. If you think you know the story of the American Revolution, think again. You've heard the story of brave colonists standing up to the mighty British Empire, demanding liberty and justice. But what if that story, so often taught in schools and repeated in popular culture, leaves out crucial truths? The American Revolution was more than a simple fight for freedom. It was a complex, often contradictory struggle that involved divided loyalties, hidden agendas, and voices rarely heard in mainstream history. As we revisit this pivotal moment in American history, we uncover the surprising twists and turns that will change the way you think about the birth of a nation. From the divided loyalties of the American people to the contributions of those often forgotten, we'll explore the complexities of this era that shaped the world we live in today. One of the most overlooked truths about the American Revolution is that it was not a unified movement. Sure, the idea of independence gained traction among many colonists, but the truth is that a significant portion of the population did not support the revolution. These folks were called Loyalists, and to understand who they were and why they felt the way they did, you have to consider where they came from and what they stood to lose. In short, Loyalists came from all walks of life. They were merchants, farmers, shopkeepers, artisans, clergy, and even some prominent political figures. What united them was their commitment to the British crown. To these colonists, Britain represented stability, prosperity, and the protection of their way of life. They feared that a break with Britain would lead to chaos and ruin. The revolutionaries, they saw them as dangerous rebels threatening the social order and their own personal interests. This split in loyalties created a climate of suspicion and tension. Families were torn apart, neighbors turned on each other, and entire communities were divided. For many, the revolution resembled a civil war as much as a war for independence. But as the war dragged on and the cost of supporting the British cause became too great, many loyalists abandoned the fight and fled to areas under British control or simply renounced their allegiance to both sides, hoping to weather the storm and preserve their property and their lives. Another often overlooked aspect of the American Revolution is the role of enslaved African Americans. At the time, more than 20,000 African Americans were enslaved in the colonies, and their experiences during the war were complex and often contradictory. On one hand, the revolution presented a potential path to freedom. As the fighting intensified, some enslaved people saw an opportunity to escape and join the British, who promised them emancipation in return for their service. Thousands took this risk, leaving the plantations and heading toward the safety of British lines. There they were promised freedom and even land, an enticing offer considering the brutality of slavery in the colonies. But the revolutionaries weren't ignorant to the potential impact of such a move. They, too, attempted to attract enslaved people to their cause, offering them the promise of freedom and, in some cases, even enlistment bonuses. Thousands of African Americans enlisted in the Continental Army, serving bravely and with distinction. Despite these acts of valor, many were betrayed after the war. The newly independent United States did not uphold its promises of freedom, and countless formerly enslaved people found themselves still shackled to the very land they had helped to win for the revolutionaries. This glaring contradiction between the ideals of liberty and the reality of slavery helps us understand the complexities of the era and the hypocrisy often at the core of revolutionary movements. Native Americans also faced tough choices during the Revolution, as their relationship with the British was rooted in a long history of trade, diplomacy, and alliance. Some tribes had been pushed off their ancestral lands and forced onto reservations, while others were actively working to stop colonial expansion westward. When the Revolution erupted, many native nations saw an opportunity to protect their lands and sovereignty by siding with the British, who they believed would help them resist colonial encroachment. However, this proved to be a risky gamble. Despite promises of support, the British did not prioritize Native American interests over those of the colonists. Moreover, as the war dragged on, many Native American communities suffered greatly due to the disruptions caused by the fighting. Ultimately, no matter which side they chose, Native peoples were caught in the crossfire of a war that was not their own, losing significant portions of their populations through violence and disease. After the war, the expansion of the United States continued, pushing Native peoples further west, and marking the beginning of a tragic chapter of forced removals and broken treaties. Furthermore, the war was not solely confined to the American colonies. The American Revolution had global implications, connecting events in North America with wider conflicts in Europe and beyond. The entry of European powers like France, Spain, and the Netherlands fundamentally changed the nature of the war. Each nation had its own set of grievances against the British Empire and saw an opportunity to weaken their rival and potentially gain territory or resources in the process. For example, France had long resented Britain's dominance on the seas and its favorable treatment of American colonies. By supporting the Americans, France aimed to weaken Britain and reassert its own position as a global power. The involvement of these European nations turned the conflict into a full-blown international war, drawing in not only soldiers, but also naval forces and significant amounts of funding. Crucial moments like the Siege of Yorktown, which marked the end of the war, were made possible by the presence of foreign troops and the French naval blockade. But the global nature of the revolution went beyond just the participants. The ideas driving the American colonists were part of a broader intellectual and political movement that was sweeping Europe. Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau had argued for natural rights and the sovereignty of the people. And as news of the American Revolution spread, it inspired similar movements in France, Haiti, and Latin America. People across the globe began to question the legitimacy of absolute monarchies and the right of colonial powers to exploit their resources and people. Finally, we have to consider the motivations and experiences of those who led and participated in the revolution. The iconic image of the American Revolution often centers around a small group of founding fathers like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin. But the truth is that thousands of people contributed to the war effort in various capacities. These ranged from local committees that organized supply drives and protests to soldiers who fought on the battlefield. Among them were men, women, enslaved people, and even some Native Americans. The diverse nature of the participants helps us understand the complexity of the revolution and the range of motivations that drove people to fight for independence. But perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that revolutions are not solely driven by a small group of elites, but emerge from the collective actions of people from all walks of life who come together to challenge the status quo and create lasting change. And when we talk about the leaders of the revolution, we also have to consider the role of economic motives. The rallying cry of "no taxation without representation" captured the popular imagination, but the reality was more nuanced. While the issue of taxation was a significant grievance for the colonists, it wasn't the only one. Many wealthy colonial elites feared the growing interference of the British government in their business interests and property rights. For them, independence meant preserving the economic system that had brought them wealth and power. The revolution, in many ways, reflected class tensions as much as ideological ones, with the wealthy landowners and merchants leading the charge for independence while the poorer colonists bore the brunt of the fighting and dying. As we analyze the motivations behind the revolution, we must acknowledge that economic interests played a crucial role in shaping the desires for self-governance and independence. Lastly, we have to remember the contributions of women during the revolution, whose roles were indispensable to the war effort. While their contributions are often overlooked in traditional historical narratives, women played a vital role in the American Revolution. They served as spies and couriers, passing along intelligence at great personal risk. Others followed the army as cooks, nurses, and camp followers, providing essential support to the troops. A few even disguised themselves as men and fought in battle. Despite these sacrifices, the newly independent American government denied women the right to vote or participate politically, denying them the very freedoms that the revolution had supposedly secured for them. As we examine the legacies of the revolution, we must confront this glaring contradiction and recognize the struggles that women have faced in their fight for equality and recognition. The American Revolution had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the borders of the newly independent United States. The ideals of liberty and self-governance inspired movements in France, Haiti, and Latin America, contributing to significant political and social changes around the world. In France, the revolution helped pave the way for the French Revolution, which ultimately resulted in the overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of a republic. Similarly, the American Revolution inspired leaders in Latin America to challenge the authority of their colonial rulers and fight for independence. As we reflect on the American Revolution, it's important to go beyond the myths and heroic tales that have become synonymous with this period. It was a struggle filled with contradictions: freedom alongside slavery, democracy alongside exclusion, and independence alongside internal division. To truly understand this defining moment in history, we must listen to the voices of the Loyalists, the enslaved, the native tribes, the women, and the poor, voices that history has too often ignored. Because in truth, the American Revolution wasn't just about creating a new nation. It was also about who that nation would include and who it would leave behind. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe for more engaging history content.